Welcome to the MrpTech Podcast. This is episode number 87. My name is Matt, and this is the weekly podcast discussing everyday tech for everyday people. And thanks again for downloading this episode of the MrpTech Podcast. I hope that you have been enjoying the last few episodes. This week, you may have noticed, again, I had slipped another week and didn't get an episode out. Last week, I was on vacation from my school district that I work in, and I was busy during the week with a few various projects that I won't get into in this show. But what I want to talk about first today, jumping right into things, I've been a Star Trek fan for just about my whole life, and I grew up. I was I grew up in the time period of Star Trek: The Next Generation. I watched when I was younger the original Star Trek series episodes when they were on syndication, and I also was someone who went to the movies and saw things like all of the Star Trek movies with the Next Generation cast in them, and I would say probably about 4 or 5 months ago, I may have shared this on the podcast, and I can't remember. I listened to a book by William Shatner. It's an audio book. It was called Leonard, My 50-Year Friendship with a Remarkable Man. And basically it was William Shatner's tribute to Leonard Nimoy, who played Mr. Spock, obviously, in the original series, and made many cameos from that point on in various movies, and that goes without saying that he was, just as important of a character as William Shatner's character. And that book in itself, if you've never listened to it or read it, basically it starts from where William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, their paths sort of cross on the set from The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and they didn't know each other. They came to find out that they were literally born months apart from each other, and eventually had their chances to play certain roles on this new science fiction television series that was coming out. And I don't think either of them realized the profound nature that that series would become. And over the course of a half a century, they had their professional highs and lows, and basically became best friends. And with any relationship, there was issues and problems that they ran into along the way, and having to deal with a media that sort of blew those things out of proportion over the years. Now, that book was an excellent book, and I believe then it was narrated by William Shatner himself. So it was, if you're a fan of anything that William Shatner does, this book, written by William Shatner and narrated by William Shatner in the audiobook format, probably did have some bias written into it. So what I recently did, being on the road a lot, I've listened to several books recently that were 45 hours plus of material, and my brain was sort of fried at that point for long stories, and I do enjoy a long story if it's a long narration, if it's really well written. But being on vacation, I wasn't going to be driving a lot, and so I did want to start listening to a new audiobook. And what I did was I looked for a shorter audiobook that I could read over vacation and not have to worry about, how much time do I have to read. If I wanted to read 20 minutes in the morning or something like that, I could. So one of the books that appealed to me was I Am Spock. Now, this was written by Leonard Nimoy and narrated by Leonard Nimoy. And I was particularly interested in hearing the comparisons between the two different books. Now, this book in particular was a response to an older book that Leonard Nimoy had written in the 70s that was called I Am Not Spock. And he got a lot of flack for writing that book, and I believe he upset a lot of fans, a lot of people out there who followed him almost religiously. He really tries to clarify some things that he may have misquoted or missaid in that book, and coming from a period in time that was much later, he's got a lot of things to say in this book. And this is another book that I would once again encourage everybody who's a Star Trek fan to listen to. Basically, in this book, the premise is, the actor who created and tweaked and protected this legendary character in Star Trek, Leonard Nimoy, basically writes a story. The publisher's summary calls it an autobiography, but really this is a conversation between Leonard Nimoy and the character Mr. Spock in many, many ways. And it basically starts with Star Trek the Motion Picture and goes through Star Trek 6, and talks about the major movies that Spock was in, and what led up to these particular movies, and then forwarding into Star Trek The Next Generation. He clarifies a lot of the critiques, as I mentioned, from I Am Not Spock, and really leaves something for the fans to really dive deep into if you wanted to learn more about the actor himself. As far as information goes, I think William Shatner's book had far more information on the whole Star Trek series and behind-the-scenes sort of activities. But Leonard Nimoy's book really dives deep into the actual movies. So there's a lot there for Star Trek fans. If you've never taken a listen to those, I really would highly recommend them. I didn't think I was going to actually like them. I mean, I was a Star Trek fan, but I wasn't super diehard Star Trek fan. I couldn't tell you, looking back, I haven't watched Star Trek in probably at least 8 or 10 years. I haven't seen an episode of Star Trek, any of the series. So, and I haven't seen the newest Star Trek movies. Oh, I did it. Yeah, so I haven't seen the new Star Trek movies at all. And that's probably something I'm going to take a look at some point in time. Speaking of movies, way back when I started reading audiobooks, I read several books. I think I read The Martian, and then I read the Steve Jobs biography. I may have read, the other one was Ready Player One. Ready Player One, speaking of, coming out in March, directed by Steven Spielberg. I cannot wait to see that movie. After that, I jumped into The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Now, for some reason, and I'm not really sure why, I thought I had watched the Hobbit movies, and I was given it as a gift, the extended edition, I think for Christmas or something like that. And I had sworn that up and down that I had seen the Hobbit movies. And it turns out that the movies, The Hobbit by Peter Jackson, the trilogy, I still had wrapped up in its packaging. And I started thinking about it, and I started talking to people about it, and they said, "Oh, don't watch it. It's not worth it." Well, over this last vacation, I decided to take it out, and I decided to watch it. Coming from the premise that The Hobbit is definitely not Lord of the Rings, and that story is not as well known, let's say, and a lot of people, I don't know if that's the right word. The Hobbit is not as impressive as the Lord of the Rings in many cases, but it is a really neat story taking place in the same universe, so to speak, as the Lord of the Rings. And I really enjoyed the book when I listened to it several years ago, and heard many criticisms about the movie. And I have to say, that sort of kept me off of it for a long time. And but watching The Hobbit, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I watched the first one maybe on Thursday or Friday of last week, and immediately went into Desolation of Smog. And I haven't seen the third one yet, but the first two, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I know it's not Lord of the Rings, and I think that's maybe where a lot of the criticism comes in. And I think they kept it true to, well, they kept it true to the story in some certain cases. Like there was a lot of written songs in The Hobbit, and those were in the movie, and I was kind of impressed that they were able to do that in a way that wasn't overbearing, but at the same time stayed true to the Hobbit story. Now, there were some liberties taken, and I think that's where a lot of people got upset. I wasn't necessarily so upset with it. There are characters in the movie that aren't in the book, but the Lord of the Rings was like that too. There was actually characters that were left out of the Lord of the Rings that were actually in the book itself. So I thoroughly enjoyed The Hobbit, and if most of you probably have seen it at this point in time, but it just goes to show you that if you are hearing good and bad things about a movie, don't let it sway you from seeing it, because I've put it on the shelf and haven't apparently watched it in some time because of just word of mouth. If the third movie is even half as good as the first two, I will probably enjoy it. I was pretty impressed with it. Okay, so that's enough of audiobooks and movie talk. I want to get into something I came across just last night about Chrome OS. And this really caught my eye. It was really kind of interesting that soon in Chrome OS, you will be able to run Linux VMs. So basically, when I started this podcast, one of the first things that I had done was I had installed Fedora or Antergos or Arch Linux on a Chromebook, and going through the hoops of putting it in a developer mode, making it USB bootable, not using Crouton, which makes it pretty easy to do. But in this case, actually installing Linux on the hardware. Crouton was always hit or miss with me, and I never really had the power backing it to make it work the way I wanted it to work. And basically, there have been recent commits to the Chrome OS source code that sort of suggests that Google is preparing to introduce support for virtual machines in regards to like Linux containers. So what that will do is make a lot of things possible for developers on Chrome OS. So as I mentioned, things like Crouton already exist, and sort of makes it seamless to switch back and forth between Chrome OS and Linux. Now, for me, I had an old Chromebook that had 2 gigs of RAM on it. It worked okay. It wasn't really the greatest thing. And I think this is going to be more towards more powerful Chromebooks, like the Pixel. And this hasn't been officially announced by Google yet, but a lot of people are speculating that this thing called Project Crostini, Crostini, basically are going to be announced this May at Google I/O. And does it make Chromebooks more appealing? That's a question I'm not sure about right now. Would it be great for students to be able to experiment in Linux VMs? Yes, but I don't think that's the market for this. I think it's more developer based marketing. And I think in order for this to work really well, you need a Chromebook with 4 gigs or greater, if there are any. But it is joining a collection of things like making Android apps workable on Chromebooks, or web apps and that type of thing. So it is another tool in the toolbox for Google and Chrome OS, specifically making it more versatile, more user-friendly, giving users access to more things that they might want. And I think that's all really great. And I guess time will tell whether or not this is actually going to become something that's useful for everyday folks or not. So I'm going to keep my eye on this, and I'm really looking forward to coming back and revisiting this and seeing where it goes. This was reported on a few websites. OMG Ubuntu is one of them that I saw it on. And yeah, let's keep our eye on that. And if you know anything more about that, let me know. Lastly, really quickly, the other thing that I did over break was I got an email from Plex offering a discounted price on the Plex Pass. And Plex is something I've been using on and off, and as time goes on, I've been using it more and more. The one thing that I didn't like about Plex is that I couldn't download music, songs, videos onto my device. I had to stream it from home, basically. And one of the features that was appealing for Plex Pass was that option where I could download my media onto my devices. So I did get an email with a very nice offer for Plex Pass, and I picked it up. I don't remember exactly what it costs off the top of my head. I picked it up for basically that reason and for the DVR function. So basically, Plex Pass gives you the best of Plex. If you are a Plex user, you can watch and record free HD TV, so you can use it as a DVR, which is pretty awesome. You can enjoy your content offline. You can create multiple users so that everybody using it can have access to their stop and start locations for TV shows and that type of thing. And Plex really has a great music experience, playing with features like Plex Mix and mood mixes, and it shows you lyrics. So basically it helps. It's really not like any other media player out there. It has so many perks that I'm starting to enjoy. I'm getting a little spoiled with Plex, I think. So if you've ever had the opportunity or seen that email come across, if you're a Plex member, I would definitely look into it and see if it's something that's worth your while. Whether it's keeping your media in the cloud on Plex server or whatever you want to do. It supports virtually all types of files and video formats. You can stream all of your media, which is cool. You can create collections. You can organize. There's even Plex VR, which I haven't taken a look at yet, but basically there's no storage limits. You have remote controls. The list goes on and on and on. You can save things to watch later on. You can watch live TV. You can organize your photos. You have a DVR function, mobile sync, cloud sync. The list just goes on and on and on. You can set parental controls. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited about Plex Pass. So, if you haven't seen that yet, take a look, see if it's something that might interest you. This episode seems to be a smorgasbord of a lot of things that I've been doing recently. The other thing that I did this week is I actually drove into work on a couple occasions this week. We're still trying to get our amateur radio station up and running. We were able to last week put our antennas up on the top of the auditorium. That was a long process. It was probably a little bit more difficult than I had imagined it being. And definitely thanks to the custodians for helping me out there. I showed up to try to help out, and other things went wrong in the building. The lights in our parking lot happened to be on the fritz. And so that sort of took priority over my project for a few hours. But in the long run, we're just about done the install process, and I'm really excited. It did get done, and we have our antennas up. Our cables run about halfway to our shack where our audio equipment's going to be. That should be finished this week, and hopefully install the rest of the equipment next week. I did happen to catch that there's another school within, let's say, 500 miles that's going to be talking with the International Space Station later on today. So I'm hoping to catch that over the air, and we'll see if I can actually hear them or not. That's one of the things that my students are interested in doing. So there's a lot that we're really interested in, and this project has just blown way larger than I thought it would. And there's even a grant involved now for next year for students being licensed in ham radio, and also getting them Teen CERT, Community Emergency Response Team training. And this grant for that just kind of fell into my lap last week, where it's going to get involving local law enforcement and fire department and students taking this training, ham radio operators, as well as search and rescue teams. It's really kind of cool, and it's funny how it all happened all at once, and nobody knew we were putting a station together at the school, so it just happened to be the right thing at the right time. So I'm really excited about that, so this project has become so much more work than I thought it was going to be, and to the point where I almost gave up on it, but I'm not the type of person that really does that. And there's been some frustrating moments, but overall, I mean, so far it's a great experience, and I could not be happier with how the install process went with the antennas last week. They look great. It's a fantastic job was done by everybody involved. So thanks to everybody at the school for doing that. And so we're pushing forward on it. It's a lot of work, and I'm more mentally than physically exhausted at this point in time, because I also I put in to become a volunteer examiner this past week. It was an open book test I had to take so that we can get students tested and licensed for ham radio. So I'll be able to do that with a small group of other volunteer examiners, hopefully next year. And so, not on top of that, it's also tax time. So we did our taxes this last weekend, and my brain is pretty fried at this point in time. But I did pull out my Arch box this weekend and updated it, and want to get into some Linux stuff for next time. So thanks everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next time.